She fired him at 9:47 in the morning. By 9:53, her daughter was locked inside a moving vehicle with no driver heading straight into a concrete wall at 40 miles per hour. The man she dismissed as just a driver was the only person standing between Tessa Sterling and a coffin. Could have kept walking. He had every reason to. Instead, Declan Rowe turned his car around. What happened next inside that garage will shake you to your core, because this isn't just a story about survival. It's about a man nobody saw until it was almost too late. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Stories like this one don't come around often, and you do not want to walk in halfway through. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's go back to the beginning. The alarm on Declan Rowe's phone went off at 4:50 in the morning. Yes, he'd intervened. He didn't need it. He'd been lying on his back in the dark for 20 minutes as Resi, staring at the way a man does when sleep has stopped being a friend. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of a car on the street below. Never truly went silent. It just lowered its voice after midnight, like someone at a party who finally got tired of shouting. Declan sat up, pressed both palms flat against his thighs, and took a single slow breath. Meditation. Not yoga. Just a man reminding himself that another day was starting and he needed to be present for it. He moved through the dark apartment without turning on a light. 6 years in the same space had made him fluent in its geography. He knew exactly where the floorboard near the bathroom door creaked third plank from the left, and he stepped around it automatically. Because he had somewhere to be at 5 in the morning. Because his daughter, Maya, was still asleep in the room down the hall, and waking her before sunrise was a crime he refused to commit. Maya was 7 years old. She slept with a battered stuffed elephant named Gerald and a nightlight shaped like the moon that cycled slowly through colors: blue, purple, soft gold. Declan had bought it at a drugstore 3 years ago when she went through a phase of being afraid of the dark. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she kept the nightlight, kept his mouth shut about it. He made coffee. Black, no sugar. Stood by the kitchen window and watched the street below come to life in pieces. A delivery truck, double parked with its hazards, blinking. A woman walking a dog that clearly wanted to go home already. Taxi idling outside the bodega on the corner where the owner, a heavy-set Dominican man named Felix, was already sliding open the metal security gate. The city was a machine. It ran whether you participated or not. Declan drank his coffee, rinsed the mug, and went to get dressed. He wore the same thing every workday. Black pants pressed, white dark jacket, the uniform of invisibility, which was, if he was being honest, the point. His employer didn't want a driver with personality. She wanted a driver who showed up on time, knew the routes, and didn't exist between pickups. Declan was very good at not existing. He left the apartment at 5:40, after checking that Maisdy's bedroom door was cracked exactly 2 inches, enough for air to circulate, not enough to let the hallway light disturb her. Mrs. Farrow, who lived 2 floors down and had been widowed for 9 years and kept the hours of someone with nowhere to be, would come up at 7 to get Maya ready for school. The arrangement had been running for 4 years without a single problem. The garage where the company vehicle was kept was 3 blocks away. Declan walked it with his collar up against the November air, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes moving in the systematic way they always did, not nervously. The way a man moves who has spent years in environments where noticing things kept people alive. He noticed things now out of pure habit. The habit didn't know it was no longer necessary. Car was a black Mercedes S-Class, washed the previous evening, tank full. Declan walked around it once before getting in, not because Sterling Dominion's maintenance team was incompetent, but because he'd stopped trusting other people's checklists sometime around his 3rd deployment. Pulled out of the garage at 6:03. Marielle Sterling's building on the Upper East Side had a private entrance on the east face of the block, accessible through a gate that required a key fob and a code. Declan had both memorized. He pulled to the curb at 6:27, 3 minutes early, and waited. 6:30 on the nose, the door opened. Marielle Sterling walked like someone who had long ago decided that The world would simply have to rearrange itself around her trajectory. Arrogance. Exactly, or maybe it was the earned kind, the kind that comes from 20 years of proving people wrong. She was 51 years old, lean and precise, with dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and probably took considerable effort. She wore a charcoal wool coat and carried a leather brief, that Declan happened to know cost more than his monthly salary because he'd once driven her to the store where she bought it. She did not look at him when she got in. She never did. "Good morning," Declan said. "Sterling Tower," she said, already looking at her phone. Was the usual exchange. Some mornings there was no exchange at all, just the door closing and the expectation that movement would follow. Declan pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic. He drove the way, he did everything efficiently, without drama. Which blocks ran slow in the morning? Which lights were worth waiting for? Which shortcuts weren't worth the gamble? He got Marielle Sterling to her building every morning, within a 2-minute window of the same arrival time, which wasn't luck. He'd intervened. It was the product of having studied every viable route for 3 months before he ever sat in this car professionally. She didn't know that. She didn't need to. They were on 5th Avenue when he first saw it. Charcoal's SUV, 3 cars back. Nissan Pathfinder late model plates from New Jersey. He wouldn't have looked twice, except for one thing, it had been there yesterday morning. The morning before. Same vehicle, same distance, same position in traffic, tucked just far enough back to look incidental, not far enough back to actually disappear. Declan watched it in his mirrors, said nothing for another 6 blocks. "Mrs. Sterling." She didn't look up. There's a vehicle that's been following us for at least 8. Charcoal Nissan Pathfinder, New Jersey plates. Currently 3 cars behind us in the right lane. She looked up at that. Glanced towards the rear window, saw the ordinary flow of morning traffic, and looked back at him with an expression somewhere between polite and impatient. "There are thousands of vehicles on this road, mister. Yes, most of them change. This one doesn't. You're concerned that someone in New Jersey drives the same route we do." Declan kept his eyes on the road. "I'm concerned that someone is tracking your family's movements. Your daughter, possibly the household staff." Pause. He could feel her choosing between engaging and dismissing. Dismissal 1. That's a significant conclusion from a Nissan Pathfinder. She went back to her phone. "Please focus on the road." Declan focused on the road, but he also memorized the plate. Sterling Tower was a 48-story glass building in Midtown that housed the headquarters of Sterling Dominion. The holding company Marielle had built from a mid-size investment firm into something that managed assets across 11 sectors. No, Declan had never been above the lobby. He didn't need to be. His job was to deliver and collect people, documents, occasionally dry cleaning when the assistant was out sick. He pulled into the building's private drop-off lane at 6:54 and came around to open her door. Marielle was already gathering her things, talking on the phone with whoever the first call of the day was. She stepped out without acknowledging him and walked toward the tower entrance. Declan watched her go, then got back in the car. He had 4 hours before his next scheduled pickup. He used them. He ran the plate through a former colleague, now a private investigator in Jersey City, who owed him 2 favors and never asked questions. The response came back in 40 minutes. The Pathfinder was registered to a shell company called Meridian Logistic Solutions, LLC, incorporated in Delaware, functional business presence that anyone could locate, which told Declan everything he needed to know, and nothing he could prove. He sat with this for a while in a parking garage 2 blocks from Sterling Tower, eating a breakfast sandwich he'd picked up from a cart on 47th and thinking through what it meant. Shell company, no real address. A vehicle that had been physically present in proximity to Marielle Sterling's home and office for at minimum 3 days running. Someone was either preparing for something or watching to see if the ground was ready. He didn't like either option. His second run of the day was Tessa. 18-year-old Tessa Sterling attended a private art school in Chelsea painting, specifically, though Declan had only learned this by overhearing a phone conversation. He collected her twice a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, bringing her back to Sterling Tower to meet her mother, or to the family's apartment on Park Avenue depending on the schedule. He'd been doing this for 8 months. In that time, he'd spoken to Tessa roughly 12 times in substantive ways, and she was, in his assessment, considerably more perceptive than her mother about most things. She noticed when he was quiet. She'd asked him once why he never played music in the car. He'd said he didn't want to assume about her preferences, and she'd laughed not meanly, just like someone who found the answer genuinely unexpected. "You can just ask," she'd said. "What do you like?" he'd asked. "Anything with good bones," she said. "Songs that have something to say." He'd started keeping a jazz station on low after that. Today was Thursday. He arrived at the school at 1:50, 10 minutes ahead of schedule. The usual pickup spot was a small one-way street on the west side of the building, where a handful of cars waited in a line. Parked and waited. At 2:03, he made a decision. He pulled out of the usual spot, drove around the block, positioned the car on the opposite side of the building, the north entrance, which was technically a loading dock, but which he'd scoped out months earlier as an alternative. Was it necessary? He didn't know. But the charcoal pathfinder had been running through his mind all morning, and what he'd learned about Meridian Logistics Solutions had settled something cold in his chest. Someone knew their routines. Routines were predictable. Predictable was dangerous. He texted Tessa, north entrance today. Green awning. She responded in 4 seconds, weird, but okay. She came out 7 minutes later. Backpack on one shoulder, a canvas bag with what appeared to be wet paint smeared on the side, dangling from her other hand. She saw the car, saw him standing beside it, and climbed in without ceremony. "Why the cloak and dagger?" she asked. "Precaution." "For what?" He met her eyes in the rear view. "I'll explain if it becomes necessary." She studied him for a second. "That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be honest." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay, I trust you." He didn't say anything to that, but he noted it. The call to Marielle's office went as expected. He'd requested 5 minutes with her assistant, a young man named Brandon, who was efficient and well-meaning and visibly exhausted at all times. Brandon had relayed the request and come back with an offer of sometime Thursday afternoon, tentatively. Declan said that would be fine. Herself appeared at 3:45, walking through the lobby where he was waiting with the posture of a woman squeezing in an inconvenience between two actual priorities. "Brandon said you needed to speak with me." "Yes, about the pickup routes. I want to vary them, both yours and your daughter's." Marielle blinked. "Why?" "The vehicle I mentioned this morning. I looked into the registration. It's a shell company, no real business presence, incorporated in Delaware. Whoever owns that Pathfinder doesn't want to be identified." She folded her arms, not defensive, evaluating. "You ran a background check on a license plate. Using what resources exactly?" "A contact. Former colleague. And this contact told you the car belongs to a shell company, which you've interpreted as a surveillance operation." "Yes. Someone is mapping the pattern of your movements and your daughter's. I'd like to disrupt that pattern before they finished mapping it." The lobby was marble and glass, and very quiet at this hour. A security guard stood near the elevator bank, studiously not listening. Marielle Sterling looked at her driver for a long moment with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mr. Rowe," she said finally, "I appreciate your diligence, but Sterling Dominion has a security team. Professional one, with actual jurisdiction and resources. If there were a credible threat to my family, they would know about it." They didn't notice the Pathfinder. A slight tightening around her eyes. "You're asking me to restructure my daughter's schedule based on a license plate search that you ran privately, using informal contacts because you have a feeling." When she put it that way, it sounded thin. He knew it sounded thin. "I'm asking you to let me change one pickup route," he said. "As a precaution." "You already changed it," she said. "Brandon told me. The north entrance today." He didn't apologize. "Without authorization." Yes, the silence between them was not comfortable. "You should have asked first," she said. "You were in a board meeting until 2. Your daughter's pickup was at 2. Then you should have waited for authorization and maintained the standard route. I wasn't comfortable doing that." Another pause. He watched her make the decision he'd known was coming since the moment he'd diverted the route without calling. "You're a driver, Mr. Rowe," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It was precise, which was worse. "You drive where I tell you to drive. on routes I've approved, on schedules I've set. That's the job. It's not a small job, I respect it. It is the job. And what you did today, changing my daughter's route without consulting me, regardless of your intentions, is not acceptable. He held her gaze. I understand. Good. She unfolded her arms. This won't happen again. He could have said more. He had more. The plate number, the name of the shell company, the 3-day pattern he'd tracked, the specific details that a trained eye would recognize as pre-operational surveillance. He said none of it, because she had already decided. And Declan Rowe, who had spent enough years around people in authority to know the difference between someone open to evidence and someone who had already made up their mind, said, "Understood, Mrs. Sterling. Have a good evening." He was back at the garage by 5. He sat in the parked Mercedes for a while without getting out, just thinking. The city moved around the garage like water around a stone, indifferent to whatever was or wasn't happening inside one man's head. Thought about the Pathfinder. He thought about shell companies and pre-operational patterns and the specific way surveillance personnel established routine observation before moving to the next phase of whatever they were planning. He thought about a lot of things he'd spent 6 years trying very hard not to think about. Then he drove home. Maya was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came in, her tongue pressed between her teeth in the specific way she had when she was concentrating hard. She was working on long division, which she hated with a passion she normally reserved for broccoli and baths. "I got 3 wrong," she announced without looking up. 3 wrong out of how many? 20. So you got 17 right. She looked up at that. It's a different way of saying it. "The same information," he said, putting his keys on the hook by the door. "You choose how to frame it." She wrinkled her nose. "You sound like a fortune cookie." "Finish your homework," he said. He made dinner pasta with a jarred sauce he'd improved with garlic and canned tomatoes, because he didn't have time for anything more ambitious on a weeknight, and a salad that Maya picked through with the deep suspicion of someone defusing a bomb. They ate at the kitchen table, which was small and slightly wobbly because one of the legs had been repaired with a piece of hardware that wasn't quite the right size, and Declan kept meaning to fix it properly and kept not doing it. Maya told him about a fight that 2 kids in her class had gotten into over who got to be line leader. She told it with the narrative detail and moral complexity of someone 3 times her age. "What did you do?" he asked. "I stayed out of it," she said. "Smart Kowalski says we should try to help resolve conflict. Miss Kowalski isn't 7 years old with 2 kids twice her size arguing 3 inches from her face." Giggled. "Dad, finish your pasta." After dinner, he did the dishes, listened to Maya, read aloud from a book about dolphins for 20 minutes. Yes, and then went through the bedtime routine with the mechanical comfort of something that had been done so many times it had become its own kind of language. Teeth, pajamas, the elephant Gerald situated correctly on the left side of the pillow where Maya insisted he belonged, the nightlight cycling through its colors. "Dad," she said when he was at the door. "Yeah. Are you okay?" He looked at her. No. 7 years old, hair messy from the pillow, watching him with eyes that were too perceptive for her age, just like they'd always been. He said, "You have your thinking face." "I always have my thinking face. Not like this one." She studied him. "Does it work?" "Nothing you need to worry about." "Okay," she said, voice that suggested she would, in fact, worry about it a little. "Good night, Maya." "Night, Dad." He pulled the door to the correct 2-inch gap and stood in the hallway for a moment. The next morning started the same. 4:50 alarm. Dark apartment. Coffee by the window. Felix opening the bodega gate on the corner. The usual machinery. But when Declan arrived at the garage, he spent an extra 5 minutes on the walk around. Because anything was likely to be wrong. Just because. Collected Marielle at 6:30. She was on the phone before she'd fully settled into the seat. Something about a board call at 8 that someone had apparently moved without telling her. She was controlled in her irritation, no raised voice, just the particular clipped efficiency of someone managing their own frustration. Declan drove. Watched mirrors. Said nothing. The Pathfinder wasn't there this morning. Which, in his experience, wasn't reassuring. It meant either they'd seen him vary the route the day before, which would tell them he'd been noticed or they'd finished collecting what they needed. Neither was good. He was 3 blocks from Sterling Tower when his phone lit up on the console. He'd set it to silent for work hours, but it was vibrating continuously, not a call, but the specific buzzing pattern he'd assigned to one number only. He glanced at it at a red light. The contact name read Harker. Danny Harker had been his closest friend for 11 years, through things that neither of them spoke about in company. He was also the person Declan trusted most on Earth, who wasn't 7 years old and asleep down the hall. Harker didn't call during Declan's work hours. They'd had that understanding for 4 years. Declan's jaw tightened. He pulled into the Sterling Tower drop-off lane, came around to open the door. Marielle stepped out still, on her call, moved toward the entrance without a word or a glance. Picked up the phone before he'd even gotten back to the driver's seat. "You're working for a woman named Marielle Sterling." Harker's voice was flat and precise. "Personal driver. You know I am. Listen to me carefully. Are you sitting down?" "I'm in a car. I'm always sitting down." The use of his name like that, shortened, weighted, stopped him. "I've been running something down for 2 weeks. A network. Financial, mostly, but with operational reach. And one of the threads keeps pulling back to Sterling Dominion." "What kind of thread?" "Corporate espionage. Potential hostile acquisition through coercion. They've been building a pressure campaign for months." A pause. "Target is her daughter." Declan was very still. "Someone inside the company," Harker continued, close to the top, "has been feeding access intel to an outside group. Building infrastructure for something that looks like it's set to move soon. Not weeks. How soon? I don't know exactly. Dec, I'm sending you everything I have, but you need to make sure that girl is nowhere predictable for the next." Declan had already stopped listening because his eyes had found something. The lobby security camera feed was visible through the glass facade of Sterling Tower, one of the monitors at the front desk, angled just enough that he could see it from 30 feet away in the drop-off lane. The underground garage camera had gone dark, not glitching, like something had cut the feed. He was out of the car before Harker finished the sentence. The marble lobby of Sterling Tower was the kind of space that made you feel like an intrusion, all vertical space and polished surfaces, security desks centered like an altar, visitors standing at it with the vaguely apologetic posture of people who knew they were in someone else's territory. Declan came through the front entrance at a pace that was not quite running, but was several degrees past walking. Security officer at the desk, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Garrett, who Declan had exchanged approximately 300 morning nods with over 8 months, looked up with the expression of someone encountering something outside the normal parameters. "Garage camera," Declan said. Went dark. Garrett blinked. "Your garage camera, B3 level. The feed on that monitor." He pointed. "When did it go dark?" Garrett swiveled to look at his monitor bank. His face changed. He reached for his radio. Declan was already moving toward the elevator bay. The elevators were not responding. He pressed the button 3 times, heard nothing, looked up at the indicator displays all blank. He turned and found the stairwell door, pulled it open, and went down. 3 floors, fast. The underground garage was fluorescent lit and smelled of exhaust and concrete, after row of vehicles in designated spaces, half a level below the street. Quiet enough that sound traveled the drip of something somewhere, the distant hum of ventilation. He heard it before he saw it, the low grinding sound of a vehicle's electric motor engaging without a key in the ignition. Then the distinct chirp of door locks engaging from the inside. He found Tessa's SUV, the black Range Rover, registered to Sterling Dominion, which Marielle used for her daughter's protection transport 2 rows in. It was moving, slowly at first, almost gently, which was worse somehow than if it had been fast. The vehicle was moving forward under its own power, with Tessa Sterling visible through the rear window, her face pressed to the glass, her mouth open. The hands-free control lights on the dashboard were cycling in a pattern that Declan recognized immediately for what it was: remote access. Someone was operating this vehicle from somewhere else. Concrete support column at the end of the row was approximately 40 feet away. The vehicle was accelerating. He ran. He covered the distance in seconds, hit the driver's door handle, found it locked, pulled his elbow back and drove it through the window in one controlled motion. The glass fell in a shower of fragments and reached in to get his hand on the door handle. The lock fought him. Someone on the other end of whatever remote connection, this was working actively to keep the doors sealed. Declan yanked the handle with everything he had. The door gave. He got one arm inside, found Tessa's wrist in the rear seat, got his other hand on the door frame, and pulled her across the center console and out of the vehicle in a single movement that was less graceful and functional. She came out onto the concrete floor in a way that was going to leave bruises, and he went down with her because there was no elegant version of this. And then he was covering her with his body as the Range Rover completed its arc and hit the support column at the end of the row, with a sound like a gunshot, and glass, the echo of it bouncing off concrete walls. Silence. Declan lifted his head. His right arm was cut from the broken window glass, not badly, but bleeding. His knee had hit the concrete floor hard enough to make itself known in terms it couldn't be ignored. Tessa was shaking. She was whole, uncut, breathing, shaking. He'd intervened. She was looking up at him with an expression he recognized, the specific face of someone whose body understood what had nearly happened before their mind had caught up with it. He said, low even. Look at me. You're okay. Her eyes found his. You're okay, he said. Again, she drew in a breath that wasn't quite steady. She stopped, tried again. Who are you? He sat up, looked at her, looked at the wreck of the Range Rover smoking gently against the concrete pillar. The man your mother fired, he said. He heard footsteps on the stairwell, now security, coming down. Alarms somewhere above. The machinery of response beginning to spin up, too late as it always was, arriving to find the aftermath instead of the event. Tessa Sterling sat on the concrete floor of her mother's private garage, still shaking, and looked at the man crouched beside her, this quiet, unremarkable driver she'd exchanged maybe 30 words with over 8 months. This person who had apparently just pulled her out of a moving vehicle seconds before it killed her. You came back, she said. They told me you were gone. Mom fired you. She did, he said. Then why? He glanced toward the stairwell, where he could hear Garrett's voice and the radio static of backup being called. Then back at her. Because leaving wasn't the same as being done, he said. He stood, offered her his hand. She took it, got to her feet, did not let go of it until the first security officer came through the stairwell door, and the room filled with voices and lights, and the ordinary chaos of people arriving too late trying to understand what they'd just missed. Declan stepped back, pressed his bleeding arm against his side, said nothing. He was very good at not existing. But standing there in the garage, under the fluorescent lights, watching the wreck smoke and the security officers swarm, and Tessa Sterling described to someone with a radio what had almost happened to her. He thought of a charcoal pathfinder. Yes, and a shell company in Delaware, and a phone call from the one person who understood exactly what he was looking at. Someone inside this building did this. And he thought, they don't know yet that she's alive. He pulled out his phone, called Harker back. She's okay, he said when Harker picked up. We have work to do. Security officers in the garage were doing what security officers do when they arrive after everything has already happened, talking into radios, establishing a perimeter around something that no longer needed a perimeter, asking questions that the situation had already answered. Garrett had come down from the lobby with 2 others, all of them moving around the wreck of the Range Rover with the focused energy of people who needed to look useful. Tessa was sitting on the hood of a parked car 2 rows away, a silver sedan belonging to someone in accounting, and she was doing the thing people do after something nearly kills them. She was talking too much. Rapid, slightly breathless, her hands moving as she described to the officer in front of her what had happened inside the vehicle. The locked doors, the steering that wouldn't respond, the way the dashboard lights had cycled like something out of a movie she never wanted to see again. Declan stood apart from all of it and pressed his jacket sleeve against the cut on his forearm. It wasn't deep. It hurt the way cuts hurt sharply at first, and then with the persistent dull insistence of something that wanted to be acknowledged. He acknowledged it and moved on. Harker picked up on the second ring. Talk to me, Harker said. The vehicle was operated remotely. Someone cut the garage camera feed first, then accessed the Range Rover's onboard system. The whole thing ran maybe 3 minutes from feed cut to impact. Declan kept his voice low, positioned with his back to the room. This wasn't improvised, Danny. Someone built this. They knew which car. They knew the camera coverage. They had remote access to a vehicle that's supposed to be on a secured network. Pause on Harker's end, which means internal access. Declan confirmed. Someone inside Sterling Dominion handed them the keys. How's the girl? Shaken, uninjured. He glanced toward Tessa, who was now pressing both hands flat on her knees. He recognized the gesture as someone trying to stop their hands from trembling without being obvious about it. She was doing reasonably well, considering. She's tougher than she looks. What about you? I'm fine. Your arm? Declan looked down at his sleeve. You're not here. I know what a broken window sounds like over the phone, Dec. Scratch. Listen, I need you to pull everything you have on the internal network access. Whoever did this used company credentials. That leaves a trail somewhere, even if they cleaned it up. Can you get into their security logs? Not directly, but I know someone who might be able to. Harker's voice shifted slightly, taking on the careful quality it had when he was thinking out loud. Sterling Dominion's IT security is contracted through a firm called Axiom Shield. Former government people, mostly. There's a guy there I've worked with. He might be willing to look at this off the books if I frame it right. Frame it fast. Whoever did this is going to know within the hour that it didn't work. Understood. Harker stopped. What? Be careful. What I've been looking at this isn't small. The network behind this has reach. Real reach. The kind that doesn't like loose ends. I'll try not to become one, Declan said, and ended the call. Turned back to the room. Garrett was looking at him from across the concrete floor with an expression that had shifted from frantic to uncertain. Kind of look a man gets when he's trying to figure out what category to put someone in, and none of the available categories fit. Mr. Rowe, Garrett said, walking over. He was keeping his voice low out of professionalism, though there was an edge under it. You don't work here anymore. I know. I have to ask. I came back, Declan said simply. I heard something wrong on the scanner. That wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough to be plausible, and Garrett was a man who liked plausible explanations. Should go up, Garrett said. Mrs. Sterling's going to want to talk to you. Yes, he'd intervened. Declan looked at the wreck of the Range Rover. The front end had crumpled against the support column in a way that made the physics of what would have happened to Tessa extremely clear. The airbags had deployed. He could see the white fabric collapsed against the steering wheel. No. Yeah, he said. I imagine she will. The elevators were working again, which told him the remote access had either timed out or been disconnected when the vehicle made impact. Whatever system had been used to control the garage, the cameras, the car's network, the elevator lockouts, as it had been designed to run for a defined window and then drop. Whoever built this had an exit plan. He rode up to the lobby level and stepped out into the marble and glass stillness of Sterling Tower's ground floor, which was now distinctly not still. Building security had gone to a heightened protocol. He could see it in the way. Staff were moving. The extra personnel near the entrance, the two men in suits by the elevator bank who hadn't been there 40 minutes ago. One of them looked at Declan's arm and then at his face. The man said, Can I ask who you are? Declan Rowe. I was the family driver until this morning. He said it cleanly, without editorializing. I pulled Tessa Sterling out of the vehicle in the garage. Tell Mrs. Sterling I'm here. The man looked at his partner. Partner spoke into a radio. There was a 30-second wait during which nobody moved, and the lobby maintained its tense, pressurized quiet. The radio crackled back with an instruction, and the man said, 43rd floor. Declan rode up alone. His reflection in the elevator's polished doors looked like what he was, a man in a good jacket, with a cut on his arm and dried blood on his sleeve, who hadn't slept well the night before. Heroic. Not composed. Just present. The doors opened onto a floor that was all controlled chaos in business casual people, moving with purpose and phones pressed to ears. A cluster of three near a glass-walled conference room, having what was clearly an urgent, heated conversation they were trying to have quietly. Someone's assistant practically ran past him with a stack of folders and didn't make eye contact. Brandon, Marielle's assistant, appeared from around a corner like someone who had been specifically positioned to intercept him. His eyes went immediately to Declan's arm. Oh, Brandon said. Should I call someone? I'm fine. Where is she? Brandon turned and led him without further discussion. Marielle Sterling's office occupied a corner of the 43rd floor, with windows on two sides that looked out over Midtown in both directions. It was a large office that did not feel large because of everything in it, not clutter, but the accumulated presence of a working life. Whiteboards on one wall, with diagrams that meant nothing to Declan. A desk that was clearly the command center of something complex. Two couches set at a right angle for meetings, both currently occupied by people who stopped talking when Declan walked in. Marielle was standing at the window. She turned when she heard him come in. He'd seen this woman controlled in every circumstance he'd encountered her, early mornings. Board call crises managed by phone in the back seat. Once a car accident on the FDR that had backed traffic 40 minutes, and she'd handled it by doing email. He had never seen her look like she looked right now, which was like someone who had been hollowed out from the inside and was operating on the structure that remained. "Clear the room," she said. The two people on the couches left without a word. Brandon pulled the door closed from the outside. Marielle and Declan faced each other across 30 feet of very expensive carpet. She looked at his arm first, then at his face. "She's not hurt," Declan said. Marielle closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were wet but not overflowing, and he understood that she was not going to let them overflow. Here, not now. Possibly not until much later when she was somewhere private. "They told me what you did," she said. He didn't say anything. "You broke the window," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they are working very hard to be. "With your elbow. It was the fastest option. You'd already been fired. You were leaving." "Yes." She walked away from the window, toward him, but sideways, toward the edge of the desk, put one hand on it, for support exactly, but in the way of someone who needed to feel something solid. "Why did you come back?" she asked. He thought about how to answer that honestly, without making it more than it was. "I got a call from a contact," he said. "Someone I trust. Told me there was a credible threat to your family being built from inside the company. I was already in the drop-off lane when the garage camera went dark. From inside the company." She repeated this like she was testing the weight of it. "Yes, you're sure." The vehicle's remote access required internal credentials. Someone with legitimate system access used it to get into the Range Rover's onboard network. The camera cut was the same. Whoever did this knew the specific feeds to disable and had the access to do it. He paused. This was planned. It wasn't opportunistic. Someone's been building this for a while. She was quiet, looking at a point somewhere past his shoulder. "I told you yesterday," he said. Not accusatory, just factual. She looked back at him. "Yes, you did." There was no apology in the room. He wasn't looking for one, and he didn't think offering one was really her first instinct even now. What she gave him instead was something more useful than an apology, which was her full attention. "What do you need?" she asked. "Access to your security system's logs from the past 72 hours. Not he'd intervened, not through your internal security team they may be compromised, or at minimum the breach happened through channels they should have caught and didn't. I have a contact who can look at this externally. That's a significant request. Yes, you're asking me to route around my own security apparatus on the word of a man I fired this morning. On the evidence in your parking garage, yes." She held his gaze. Behind her, Manhattan continued indifferently in both directions. A helicopter crossed the window. "Give me a name," she said finally. "Your contact." "Danny Harker, former Naval Intelligence, current licensed private investigator out of New Jersey. I'll give you his credentials." She picked up the phone on her desk. "Call him to call Brandon. Get me the head of IT security and the building security director in here in 10 minutes. She set it down and looked back at Declan. "You'll stay." It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway. Yes, he pulled out his phone and sent Harker a text. "They're opening the door. Be ready." Then he thought of something and added, "Don't tell them how we know each other yet." He pocketed the phone and stood in the corner of Marielle Sterling's office while the machinery of response began assembling itself around him, and he thought about what Harker had said on the phone earlier. This isn't small. The network behind this has reach. He'd been careful for 6 years. Quiet job, quiet life, small apartment, Maya's homework, and Gerald the elephant, and the moon nightlight cycling through colors. He had kept himself very deliberately on the far side of the line where things like this happened. He was now standing in the middle of something that had very clearly crossed that line to find him, or found him by accident. He wasn't sure yet which. And the part of him that had spent years in places where the wrong call got people killed was running calculations in the background of every other thought he had. 10 minutes passed. 2 men came in. The meeting began. Declan stood in the corner and listened to everything and said very little, and nobody noticed that he was memorizing the specific way each of them reacted to specific pieces of information, because he was very good at not being noticed. He was starting to think that was going to have to change. The head of IT security was a thin, angular man in his late 40s named Prescott, who wore his discomfort at being questioned like a second jacket, and kept referencing protocol in a way that suggested protocol was something he used to avoid being responsible for outcomes. The building's security director, former NYPD sergeant named Weiss, was more direct. He was angry. The specific anger of a professional who understood that something had happened on his watch and was trying to locate exactly whose fault it was. Declan watched both of them explain what they knew, which was less than he did, and what they were doing about it, which was mostly documentation and escalation. He kept his mouth shut until Marielle looked at him and said, "Mr. Anything to add?" Both men looked at him. Prescott, with barely concealed irritation, was with guarded curiosity. The remote access to the Range Rover required a credential level that isn't available to outside contractors, Declan said. Vehicle network is on the internal IT infrastructure, which means whoever accessed it either had direct employee credentials or used credentials they obtained from someone inside. Either way, you're looking for someone with authorized access to both the physical security system and the vehicle network. That's a narrow category. Can't be more than a dozen people. Prescott blinked. How do you know our vehicle network architecture? I drove that car for 8 months, Declan said. I read the manual, which was not entirely why he knew it, but it was the simplest answer. Wiz was looking at him differently now. You're saying this is an inside job. I'm saying the technical evidence points in that direction. Yes. I don't have access to the technical evidence. I was in the garage, Declan said. I saw the dashboard. The access protocol that was running on that vehicle's screen when I got the door open is not an external remote start function. It's an internal fleet management override. Those credentials are issued internally and logged internally. If you pull those logs, we will be pulling all relevant logs, Prescott said, cutting him off in a way that was clearly meant to re-establish the pecking order. Through proper channels. Then pull them fast, Declan said. Because whoever did this knows it didn't work, and they're currently deciding what to do about that. Silence. Marielle was looking at Prescott. Pull the logs, she said. All of them, today. Prescott nodded. Weiss nodded. The meeting broke up with the controlled urgency of people who had been given a clear instruction from someone they were afraid of disappointing. When they'd gone, Marielle stood by her desk and rubbed 2 fingers against her temple in the way of someone whose head had begun hurting some time ago. I want to see Tessa, she said. Not to Declan specifically, just out loud. She's downstairs, Declan said. She was talking to one of the security officers. I know where she is. A pause. I spoke to her on the phone while it was happening. She stopped. Started again. The call disconnected before. He understood what she wasn't finishing. She asked for you, he said, when it was over. First thing she asked was where her mother was. That landed. He watched it land. Marielle Sterling pressed her lips together and looked at the window. She's tough, Declan said. Takes after someone. Marielle looked at him sharply, as if checking whether he was being sarcastic. Yes, he'd intervened. He wasn't. She seemed to determine that, and something in her expression shifted very slightly in a direction he couldn't name. I need to make some calls, she said. There are people who need to know about this. Board members, legal, our insurance carrier. She paused. And I need to figure out what to tell Tessa. Tell her the truth, Declan said. She's 18. She was in that car. She already knows it wasn't an accident. Marielle looked at him. She figured that out on the garage floor, he said. She's smart. Treating her like she didn't is going to make her feel worse than knowing. A long pause. You've spoken to my daughter 12 times, Marielle said. 13 now. And you're advising me on how to talk to her. I didn't actually. No, he said. You didn't. Of those silences that had its own texture. Marielle sat down behind her desk for the first time, which told him something about the state of her knees. Where will you go? She asked. You don't work here. I'm going to go find a bathroom and deal with my arm, he said. I'm going to sit somewhere in this building until I hear from my contact. Because until I know more about what's behind this, I don't think you should have fewer eyes, not more. She should have told him to leave. He knew that. He was no longer an employee, and he was requesting to remain on site on the basis of a situation he'd partly inserted himself into by choosing to turn his car around. Brandon will find you a room, she said instead. He nodded and moved toward the door. He stopped. You said yesterday. She stopped, reformulated. You told me there was a threat. I didn't listen. He turned around. She was looking at him with the deliberate directness of someone making themselves do something that didn't come easily. I was wrong, she said. He held her gaze. 3 words clean and undecorated. He'd been the receiving end of enough non-apologies in his life to recognize the real thing. Thank you, he said. He found the bathroom down the hall from the executive suite, ran cold water over his arm, and spent 10 minutes cleaning up what he could. Cut was manageable. He'd had worse from things considerably less understandable than a broken car window. He found a chair in a small conference room Brandon had unlocked for him and sat down and called Mrs. Farrow. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Mr. Rowe. I'm going to be late, he said. Can Maya stay for dinner? Course she can. She's fine. She's been drawing at my kitchen table for an hour. Tell her I'll be there by 8. Is everything all right? He looked at the conference room wall. A white board with old meeting notes on it that someone had half erased. Potted plant that needed water. Working on it, he said. He sat for a while after the call, not resting exactly, but managing the specific kind of tired that isn't about sleep, it's about running calculations continuously without a break. His arm throbbed. His knee, where it had hit the concrete, had stiffened up enough that straightening it fully took a deliberate effort. His phone buzzed. Harker. I'm in, Harker said. My guy at Axiom got me read-only access to the security logs from the last 96 hours. Someone's been testing that garage system for 3 days. Small accesses, short duration, nothing that would trigger an alert on its own. Pattern is there if you know to look for it. Can you trace the credential? Already working on it. The access came through an executive-level account, someone with senior IT clearance. Harker's voice carried the flat quality of a person reading something they don't like. The account belongs to a Garrick Thorne. Declan was very still. He knew the name. He'd seen it on the building directory, heard it in lobby conversations, seen it on the signature line of internal communications he'd occasionally been asked to deliver. Garrick Thorne, Chief Operating Officer, 11 years with Sterling Dominion, the man Marielle trusted most inside her own building. You're certain, Declan said. The logs don't lie. Could be someone who compromised his credentials to use as a shield. I can't rule that out. But the access pattern fits someone who knows the system from the inside out. These aren't the moves of someone fumbling around with stolen credentials. This is someone who understands the architecture. Declan sat with this for a moment. Thought about Marielle, upstairs making calls to board members and lawyers. Thought about Tessa, downstairs still shaking on someone else's car hood. Thought about Garrick Thorne, wherever he was in this building right now, presumably in his office, presumably doing whatever a man does when he's just learned his plan failed. Send me everything, Declan said. Already sending. Be careful how you move on this. If it's him, he's going to be watching for pressure. The moment he feels cornered, he's going to start looking for an exit. And exits in situations like this one usually involve someone else taking the blame. Declan thought about that. Thought about a shell company in Delaware and a charcoal pathfinder and 8 months of driving a woman to work every morning while someone in her building was building the scaffolding of her daughter's death. Let him try, he said quietly. He ended the call. He sat in the small conference room with his arm throbbing and his knee stiff and his phone full of files from Harker and thought about what to do next. One thing he kept coming back to was this: whatever happened from here was not going to let Tessa Sterling become a loose end. He stood up, put on his jacket, walked back out into the controlled chaos of the 43rd floor, past the people with their phones and their urgent conversations and their folders, toward the elevator bank. He had a name. Names were places to start. Garrick Thorne's office was on the 41st floor, 2 levels below Marielle's, which Declan had always thought said something about the specific architecture of corporate hierarchy, close enough to be indispensable, far enough down to be reminded of it. He'd been in the lobby of that floor exactly once, delivering a document that Brandon had been too swamped to run down himself. He remembered a frosted glass door with Thorne stenciled on it in simple block letters, a receptionist who hadn't looked up, low murmur of a phone call happening behind the closed door in the measured tones of someone who chose every word deliberately. He did not go to the 41st floor. Not yet. What he did instead was find an empty workstation in a far corner of the 43rd floor that nobody had claimed in the reorganization of the afternoon, sat with Harker's files open on his phone, and start reading. The files were dense. Harker had been thorough in the way that people are thorough when they've been working something quietly for 2 weeks and have had time to organize their thinking. Shell companies, mostly a chain of them, each one incorporated in a different state, each one with a different registered agent and a different apparent purpose, each one ultimately pointing back toward a parent entity, called Vantage Capital Group, which was registered in the Cayman Islands and had no publicly searchable officers. Underneath Vantage Capital Group, if you followed the financial transfers, Harker had traced through 3 different banking institutions and 2 overseas accounts. You found a pattern of payments. And one of those payment streams had a terminus that Harker had highlighted in red at the bottom of the 3rd document. A personal account opened 18 months ago, belonging to a Garrick A. Not proof of anything on its own, Declan knew. Money moved in complicated ways for complicated reasons, and a good defense attorney could construct a narrative around almost any payment trail given enough time and creativity. But proof wasn't what he needed right now. Right now, he needed to understand the shape of the thing, what it was, how big it was, which direction it was moving. He read for 40 minutes. His arm had stiffened enough that moving it reminded him it was there, and he pressed it against his side and kept reading. What emerged slowly from Harker's documents was this: someone operating through Vantage Capital Group and its chain of subsidiaries was attempting to acquire Sterling Dominion's most valuable division, a technology portfolio that had been built over 9 years and was currently valued at somewhere between $2.3 and $2.8 billion, depending on the quarter. The acquisition had been stalled for months because Marielle refused to sell it. The division wasn't just an asset to her, it was. From everything Declan had read in the documents and overheard in 8 months of driving, the part of the company she'd built from nothing, piece that was personally hers in a way the rest of the conglomerate wasn't. Someone wanted it, and she wouldn't sell. So someone had decided to make her want to sell. And the most effective way to make a woman like Marielle Sterling want to do something she had decided not to do was to threaten the one thing she couldn't manage with efficiency and resolve, and a 48th floor view. Her daughter. Declan sat back from the workstation and thought about that for a long moment. Thought about the specificity of it, the patience involved, the months of preparation, the careful construction of access and infrastructure. This wasn't rage or desperation. This was calculation. Someone had looked at Marielle Sterling and said, the daughter, and then spent the better part of a year building a mechanism to use that daughter as a lever. No, the fact that it had nearly worked, and the fact that the person who had built it was likely 2 floors below as him right now, made something cold settle in Declan's chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. It was the thing he recognized from before. From the years, he never talked about the specific internal stillness that happened when he understood exactly what kind of situation he was in and exactly what it was going to require. His phone buzzed. Harker again. How deep did you read? Harker asked. Bottom of the 3rd document. The payment stream. Did you get to the 4th? He hadn't. He opened it. Top, Harker had written a single line. This is where it gets complicated for you personally. Read me the header, Harker said. Declan looked at the document. It was a set of financial records from 6 years ago, not connected to Sterling Dominion at all. They referenced a defense contracting firm he recognized, a series of payments, and a classified operation designation that he hadn't seen in print since the last time he'd looked at the paperwork that ended his career. He was quiet for a moment. The network behind Vantage Capital, Harker said carefully. It's not new, Deck. The shell company architecture, the financial routing, the way they use inside people to build leverage. I've been looking at this for 2 weeks, and what I'm seeing is consistent. This is the same methodology I've been tracing in 3 other cases over the past 4 years. Different targets, different industries, same underlying structure. Declan kept his voice level. You're saying the network that's behind what happened to Tessa Sterling today is connected to the network that destroyed my career 6 years ago. I'm saying the fingerprints look the same. I can't prove it's the same people. But the architecture doesn't lie, and the architecture is identical. A pause. I think when you started noticing things about that Pathfinder and changed the pickup route, you may have tripped a wire, accelerated their timeline. They were probably planning this for another 2 or 3 weeks. Your interference moved it up. Declan closed his eyes for a moment. Open them. Which means I'm part of why it happened today, he said. You're the reason she's alive today, Harker said, with the quiet directness of someone correcting a misunderstanding they considered important. Flip that around. He didn't answer. There's more, Harker said. Of course there is. The 4th document, keep reading to page 6. There's a set of communication records I pulled from a source I won't name over the phone. Thorne has been in contact with someone inside the defense contractor network. The same network. For over a year. Harker's voice took on the quality of controlled urgency. Whoever these people are, they've been using Garrick Thorne as an inside operator. They found him, cultivated him, probably made promises about what he'd get out of it. But they also know about you. They know who you were before you became a driver. And I think I'm not certain, but I think that you being in proximity to this situation was not entirely coincidental. Declan sat with this. You think they placed me, he said. I think it's possible someone made sure a particular job posting crossed your path at a moment when you needed a job. I think it's possible they wanted someone with your background close to Marielle Sterling for reasons I haven't fully worked out yet. Harker stopped. Or I'm wrong, and it's a coincidence. But I've stopped believing in coincidences about 15 years ago, and I haven't found a good reason to start again. After he got off the phone, Declan sat for a while without moving. The workstation hummed quietly. Out the window, the sky over Manhattan had shifted to the particular gray of late afternoon. In November, the light going flat and even across the tops of the buildings. He thought about Maya at Mrs. Farrow's kitchen table, drawing something. He'd promised 8 o'clock. He thought about a job posting that had appeared in his inbox 6 years ago from a staffing firm he'd never heard of, 3 months after his discharge, when he was running low on options and a 7-month-old daughter, required things that required income. He'd taken the interview, gotten the job, and had spent so much energy being grateful for the stability that he'd never asked the question that was obvious in retrospect. How did they find him? He pushed it aside. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered enormously, but because there was a sequence to this, and the sequence required him to stay in the present moment and move through it correctly. He went to find Marielle. She was in the conference room adjacent to her office, on a call that she wrapped up when he appeared in the doorway. 2 lawyers he didn't recognize were sitting at the table with laptops. She stood, came to the doorway, and stepped into the hall with him, pulling the conference room door mostly closed behind her. I need to tell you something, he said, and it's going to be difficult to hear. She looked at him. Her face had settled from the hollowed quality of earlier into something harder and more functional. The executive no reasserting itself over the mother, not because the mother had gone away, but because the executive was how she survived. Tell me, she said. The credential access in the garage logs. My contact traced it. He kept his voice low and even. The account belongs to Garrick Thorne. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and was answered. Marielle's face did not change expression in any way that was detectable from the outside. He was realizing one of the things she was genuinely skilled at absorbing information in real time without letting it show. What he could see was in her eyes, which went very still in the way that eyes do when a person's brain has just received something it's working hard to process. Garrick, she said. Yes, Garrick Thorne. A breath. Controlled, measured. You understand what you're saying. I understand it's circumstantial at this point. The access came through his credentials. That could mean he used them directly, or someone compromised his account to use as cover. There's more than the credentials. My contact has been tracing a financial network for 2 weeks. The network connects to an entity trying to acquire your technology division, and there's a payment stream within that network that leads to an account in Thorne's name. He paused, and the communications records suggest he's been in contact with people connected to that network for over a year. She put her hand on the wall beside her, flat palm, and looked at it for a moment. 11 years, she said quietly. It wasn't directed at him. It was something she was saying to herself or saying to the 11 years. I'm sorry, he said. Don't. She said it without sharpness. Just a refusal of the sentiment. She pushed off the wall and straightened. What do you need to prove it? Time and access. The logs my contact has are unofficial, they're real, but they were obtained through informal channels and they can't go directly to law enforcement. We need the official version. I need your IT security to pull the formal access logs under your authority. Prescott can do it. Just direct him specifically to the fleet management system and the camera control infrastructure. The official logs will corroborate what my contact found. We also need the financial records compared against your internal accounts to find where the acquisition pressure is coming from. That's weeks of work, she said. At a normal pace, yes. I'm hoping we can accelerate. How? By not telling Thorne we're looking. He held her gaze. He's going to know the garage operation failed. He's watching for your next move. If he thinks we're still in triage mode, still dealing with the immediate aftermath, he won't know what's being built underneath him. The moment he knows he's been identified, he's going to start moving assets and deleting tracks. She was quiet for a long moment. He's going to be at the board debrief, she said. Tomorrow morning. All the senior executives are required. Called it an hour ago. Then you go to that meeting and you treat him exactly as you would have 20 minutes ago. Before I told you this. She looked at him with something complicated in her expression. You're asking me to sit across a table from the man who tried to kill my daughter and act like I don't know. For approximately 18 to 24 hours. Yes, that's not something I'm certain I can do. I know. He didn't pretend otherwise. But I think you can. She studied him for a moment, and he could see the calculation behind her eyes, not coldness, but the specific kind of controlled reasoning that had built a $2.8 billion technology portfolio from a standing start. She was doing what she did, assessing, measuring, determining what the situation required, and whether she was capable of providing it. All right, she said. He nodded. One more thing, she said. Who are you, actually? And I want a real answer, not the version that fits on an employment form. He'd been expecting this. He just hadn't been sure when it would come. Declan Rowe, he said. That part's real. I'm 32. I have a daughter named Maya. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights that has a wobbly kitchen table I keep meaning to fix. He paused. Before this, I was a Navy SEAL. 12 years. My last operation was classified. It went wrong. My closest teammate died. And when the dust settled, the official record was buried in a way that made it look like the failure was mine. It was discharged. I needed work. I found this job. She was very still. The classified operation, she said. Was it connected? Possibly, he said. My contact believes the network behind what happened today may be the same network connected to what ended my career. I don't have enough to be certain. She looked at him for a long time. With pity, he would have found that hard to tolerate, but with the expression of someone recalibrating, adjusting their map of a terrain they thought they knew. Pathfinder, she said. The route change. You knew. I suspected, he said. There's a difference. Not much of one from where I'm standing. He didn't argue with that. Go home, she said. You said 8 o'clock to your daughter. He blinked, slightly thrown by the shift. I heard you on the phone with Mrs. Farrow, she said. The walls on this floor are not as solid as the architect intended. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Come back tomorrow at 6. Use the east entrance. I'll have a badge waiting. He looked at her. You're rehiring me. I'm engaging your consulting services on a temporary basis, she said, at a rate commensurate with your actual skill set, which I am currently revising upward considerably. She turned toward the conference room. Brandon will email you the details tonight. He stood in the hallway for a moment after she'd gone back in, processing the last 20 minutes. Then he went to find the elevator, rode down to the lobby, walked out through the east entrance into the gray November afternoon, and called Harker from the sidewalk. She's on board, he said. Good, Harker said, because something came in while you were talking to her. The fourth document, page 9, bottom. One of the communication records I pulled. There's a reference to a contingency plan. If the garage operation failed, there's a backup move. Declan stopped walking. What kind of backup move? Kind that involves shifting the blame. Harker's voice was careful. There are communications in this record that reference a former employee, someone recently dismissed from Sterling Dominion. Someone with a military background, and Funk with a military background who changed a family member's pickup route without authorization and has informal contacts in the intelligence community. Declan stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and understood exactly what he was hearing. They're going to frame me, he said. They've already started, Harker said. The groundwork is laid. Your vehicle's recorded entering the garage this morning. That's going to look deliberate when someone shapes the narrative around it. Your route change yesterday is going to look like you were establishing irregular patterns to create confusion. Your military background is going to be presented as operational expertise used for criminal purposes. A pause. And the fact that you have a connection to a former naval intelligence operative who's been running an unofficial investigation into a financial network is going to look like you've been working this play for a long time. Pedestrians moved around Declan on the sidewalk, the way water moves around a stone, indifferent and continuous. When? He asked. I'd guess they make the move at the board meeting tomorrow. Put the evidence in front of Marielle and the board before you have a chance to build your case. Force her to act on what looks like proof. Make her look reckless if she doesn't. Declan thought about Marielle at that board table. Thought about evidence appearing that implicated the man she'd just rehired on an unofficial basis. Thought about the specific difficulty of her position. She'd already been wrong about him once today. And people who once became more susceptible to being wrong, again in the opposite direction. Thought about Garrick Thorne, 2 floors below her office, doing exactly what Declan had told Marielle he would do when he felt cornered. How much time do we have? He said. Board meeting is 9 a.m., Harker said. I'd say we have until roughly 8:30 before whatever he's planning is in front of the room. Declan looked at his watch. It was 4:50 in the afternoon. Roughly 15 hours. Then we work tonight, he said. I was afraid you'd say that, Harker said, without sounding afraid at all. Declan walked to his car, which was parked 2 blocks from the tower in a garage he'd been using for 8 months. Sat in it for a moment. Called Mrs. Farrow. I'm sorry, he said when she picked up. I need until 10, possibly later. A pause. Mrs. Farrow was not a woman who made people feel guilty. It wasn't her style. What she did was absorb information practically. She can sleep here if it runs past 9, she said. I'll put the cot in the back room. Thank you, mister. Yes. Whatever it is, be careful. She asks about you, you know. Even when she's drawing and not paying attention. She asks. He sat with that for a moment. I know, he said. Tell her I'll be home. He ended the call and drove back to his apartment to pick up his laptop and the few physical files he kept in a locked box under his bed documents from 6 years ago. Records he'd preserved in the specific way of someone who had been told to let something go and had quietly decided not to. He hadn't looked at them in 2 years. He'd told himself. It was because he'd made peace with what happened. He understood now that he'd been waiting. He packed a bag, left his apartment, and drove to Harker's office in Jersey City. Danny Harker operated out of a second-floor space above a dry-cleaning business on a street that was either transitional or had been transitional for 15 years without resolving one way or the other. The office smelled like old coffee and printer toner. There were filing cabinets along one wall, 3 monitors on a desk that had clearly been expanded from its original footprint, with a piece of wood and some clamps, whiteboard covered in what appeared to be the structured diagram of a very complicated problem. Harker was 41, built like someone who had once been in good shape and had partially maintained it through general stubbornness, with a jaw that looked like it had met something hard at least once, and a way of being still when he was thinking that Declan recognized because he'd learned it from the same place. "You look terrible," Harker said when Declan came in. "You look worse," Declan said, which was inaccurate, but traditional. They didn't hug. They shook hands once, the way they always had, and then moved to the desk. Declan laid out the physical files from his box. Harker pulled up his digital records on the center monitor. They sat side by side and began working through the connections between what Declan had from 6 years ago and what Harker had from the past 2 weeks, looking for the thread that tied the two together. It took 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee and one extended argument about the correct interpretation of a payment transfer date before they found it. It was a name, a single name that appeared in both sets of records in Declan's old classified operation documents as a civilian contractor attached to the mission, and in Harker's current financial net diagrams as an officer of one of the subsidiary shell companies under Vantage Capital Group. The name was Raymond Falk. "Tell me about him," Harker said. "He was embedded with us for 6 weeks before the operation, presented as an intelligence liaison. He had clearance verified, or at least it checked out at the time." Declan looked at the name in his old files. He was the one who provided the intelligence on the target location. The intelligence that turned out to be wrong, or not wrong constructed, designed to put us in a specific place at a specific time. "And your teammate died in that location?" "Yes." Harker was quiet for a moment. "He's listed here as a director of Meridian Strategic Consulting, which is a subsidiary of Vantage Capital." He tapped the monitor. "He's been with the Vantage network for at least 4 years, based on what I can trace. But I'd bet he was connected to them before that." "He was connected to them before that," Declan said. "He was always connected to them. The intelligence failure wasn't a failure, it was a product. They needed the operation to go wrong in a specific way, and he built the environment to make it happen." He stopped, looked at the name, and then when it did go wrong, they used the classified status to bury the details and let the outcome speak for itself. Inquiry, no review. Just a record that said the mission failed, and the officer in command made errors in judgment. Me. Harker let that sit for a moment. Then what did they get out of it? The operation going wrong. What did that give them? "A contract," Declan said. He'd thought about this over 6 years, in the hours before sleep, working through the geometry of it without ever having the information to complete the picture. The operation was supposed to intercept a transaction, physical and financial, intelligence transfer, and a payment. The people behind the Vantage network were one side of that transaction. When the operation failed, the transaction completed. They got what they came for, and we were left holding a classified failure and a body. He said it with the flatness of someone who had already processed the grief long ago, and what remained was just the facts, arranged in a line. Harker nodded slowly. Then he turned to his keyboard and started typing. "Okay," Harker said. "So here's what we have. We have Garrick Thorne connected to Vantage Capital through payments and communications. We have Vantage Capital connected to an attempted acquisition of Sterling Dominion's tech division. We have a coercion operation, the garage attack, designed to force Marielle Sterling to sell. We have Raymond Falk connected to Vantage Capital as a current officer and connected to your past operation as a contractor. And we have the same operational methodologies appearing in both your 6-year-old case and the current situation." He looked at Declan. "That's a story." "It's a story," Declan said. "It's not yet proof that holds up, but it's enough to know what we're looking for and where to look for it yet." Harker cracked his knuckles. "I need 4 hours. I want to pull the corporate registration history on Meridian Strategic Consulting and trace Falk's movement through the Vantage subsidiary network. If he's been with them as long as I think he has, there's going to be a paper trail that connects to the operation. Easily, but it'll be there. 4 hours puts us at 2 in the morning, which gives us 6.5 hours before the board meeting." Declan thought about that. Thought about Marielle, somewhere across the river in her apartment on Park Avenue, presumably not sleeping either. Thought about Tessa in her room, whether the painting she'd been working on when he picked her up from school was still wet, Whether she was lying in the dark, thinking about the way the SUV doors had locked, and the steering had gone rigid under her hands. Thought about Garrick Thorne at his own home, working through whatever he was working through. Believing he had the advantage. Believing the frame he'd built was solid enough to hold. 4 hours, Declan said. Then we figure out how to use what we have. He opened his laptop, pulled Harker's files onto his own screen, and started reading from the beginning again. Because he'd missed anything the first time. Because, in his experience, the thing that breaks a situation open is almost never the thing you expect. It's the small detail you passed over in the first read, because it didn't look significant yet. He was looking for the detail. Outside, Jersey City went through whatever Jersey City went through at 9 in the evening, traffic thinning, lights going on in windows, the ordinary rhythms of people who were not sitting in second-floor offices above dry-cleaning businesses, trying to build a case against a man who had tried to kill a girl and was now trying to make it look like someone else's fault. No. The whiteboard behind Harker's desk was covered in names and lines and numbers. Declan looked at it. Garrick's name was near the top, circled twice, with lines running out from it in several directions. Raymond Falk's name was lower, newly added, with a line running from it toward a single word that Harker had written in the upper right corner when he'd first started working the case. The word was why. That was always the question that mattered. How, not who those were solvable with enough time and access. Why was the question that told you the shape of the thing, the scale of it, what it was actually connected to. Declan looked at that word for a long time. Then he went back to reading, and the night moved forward around him like it had somewhere else to be. The detail Declan had been looking for appeared at 12:47 in the morning, buried in a corporate registration amendment filed 14 months ago with the Delaware Secretary of State. It was a change of registered agent for Meridian Logistic Solutions, the same shell company that owned the charcoal Pathfinder he'd tracked through Manhattan traffic 3 days ago. The previous registered agent had been a law firm in Wilmington that handled dozens of similar entities and would have been impossible to trace meaningfully. The new registered agent was a sole practitioner named Clifton Ames, operating out of an address in Hoboken. Declan would not have thought twice about Clifton Ames, except for one thing. The same name appeared in Harker's financial network documents as the signatory on 2 wire transfers from a Vantage Capital subsidiary to a mid-tier brokerage account transfers that had occurred 8 months ago, yes, timed almost exactly to when Sterling Dominion's technology division had first appeared on the acquisition radar of the entities Harker had been tracking. He pulled Harker away from the center monitor and showed him. Harker looked at it for a long moment. Then he sat down and started typing. "He's the connection point," Harker said, working as he talked. "The shell companies don't touch each other directly. They run through service providers. Lawyers, accountants, registered agents. People who process paperwork without asking what it's for." He pulled up a search. Clifton Ames, Hoboken. Let's see how deep his client list goes. Took 20 minutes to find. Ames had a modest web presence, a professional directory listing, a New Jersey bar registration, a LinkedIn profile last updated 2 years ago. But he also had a history of corporate filings that Harker could pull through public records, and then history told a story that a careful reader could follow. Ames had served as registered agent or signatory for 11 different entities over a 6-year period. 4 of those entities were subsidiaries in the Vantage Capital network. 2 others were connected, through a different chain of ownership, to the defense contracting firm that had been involved in Declan's classified operation 6 years ago. 11 companies, Declan said. 11 that we can find, Harker said. There are probably more. Can we get to them? Harker looked at his watch. It's 1 in the morning. I'm aware. You want to go to Hoboken at 1 in the morning and knock on a lawyer's door. I want to know if he'll talk, Declan said. If someone explains to him in concrete terms exactly what he's connected to and what the alternative is to being the most cooperative person in the room. Harker leaned back in his chair. It creaked in the specific way of chairs that have held a lot of weight over a lot of years. He's a document processor, DEC. He probably doesn't know half of what his clients are doing. He signs what they send him and takes the fee. Then he has nothing to be afraid of, Declan said. And he might have everything to gain from getting ahead of it. Harker looked at him. You really think this is the right thread? I think Garrick Thorne is going to walk into a board meeting in 8 hours and put together a story that implicates me and discredits everything we've built tonight. I think the only way to stop that is to show up to that meeting with something that cannot be explained away. He looked at the monitor. Ames is a thread that runs through both sides of this, the current operation, and what happened to me 6 years ago. If he talks even partially, that's corroboration across 2 separate events. That's a pattern that makes Thorne's narrative about a rogue driver very hard to sustain. Harker was quiet for a moment. I'll drive, he said. The address in Hoboken was a 3-story brownstone on a residential street that was quiet in the particular way of places where people go to bed at reasonable hours and expect the neighborhood to respect that. A light was on in the second-floor window. Either Clifton Ames kept late hours, or they'd gotten lucky. Declan rang the bell and waited. The intercom crackled after 30 seconds. Who is it? A voice, male, cautious but not panicked, the voice of someone who occasionally got late calls and had learned to assess rather than assume. My name is Declan Rowe, Declan said into the intercom. Law enforcement. I'm not a threat. I need 15 minutes of your time about some of your corporate clients, and I'm asking nicely because I think when you understand the situation, you'll want to have this conversation before it becomes a different kind of conversation with different people. A long pause. Which clients? The intercom said. Meridian Logistics Solutions. Vantage Capital Group. Clifton, I've got the filings in my hand. I'm not guessing. Longer. The door buzzed open. Clifton Ames was 53 and looked like someone who had been a medium-level athlete in college and had carried the frame of it into middle age without maintaining the muscle. He was in a robe and reading glasses with the slightly dazed quality of someone pulled from deep concentration rather than sleep. His second-floor office was a comfortable mess filing cabinets, stacked folders, a desk with 2 monitors, and a reading lamp that had clearly been positioned for someone who spent long hours there. He looked at Declan, looked at Harker, looked at his own front door as though briefly considering reversing the decision to open it. Sit down, he said, and didn't sound entirely like he meant it. They sat. Declan laid out what they had: not everything, and not the most sensitive pieces, but enough. The shell company chain, the registered agent history, wire transfers, the connection between the Vantage network and the events at Sterling Tower that afternoon. He kept his voice level and factual, the way you deliver information to someone you're trying to move from defensive to cooperative, without triggering the reflex to lawyer up and shut down. Ames listened without interrupting. His face moved through a sequence of expressions: recognition, discomfort, and then the specific stillness of a person calculating their own exposure. When Declan finished, Ames took off his glasses and set them on the desk. I process filings, he said. I'm a registered agent. I sign documents. I don't know what my clients do with their companies. I believe that, Declan said. But you know who contacts you, who sends you the paperwork. You have a name or a firm at the other end of the chain. Ames looked at his desk. Clifton, Harker said. He had the particular gift, honed over 15 years, of sounding like the most reasonable person in any given room. Here's where you are right now. You've processed filings for entities connected to an attempted murder and a financial fraud that's going to be in front of federal investigators within the next 48 hours. That's the situation, regardless of what you do tonight. Question is whether you're a document processor who got used without full knowledge and cooperated when he understood the scope of it, or whether you're someone investigators have to spend time digging around. These are 2 very different positions. Ames turned his glasses over in his hands. Once, twice. The contact from Meridian, he said finally, his voice gone flat and quiet, was a firm called Palliser Associates, corporate management, out of Philadelphia. He looked up. They handled the paperwork. I never had direct contact with whoever was behind the LLC itself. Pallisers, they sent the docs. They transferred the fees. They were professional and prompt. I had no reason to look further. Do you have contact information for Palliser? I have what they gave me, which is probably a mail drop. He picked up his glasses again. I have the email chain, and I have one phone number that I called once when a filing deadline was coming up and the documents were late. He paused. I'm going to be honest with you. That number. When I tried it 6 months ago to ask a routine question, it had been disconnected. But you kept the number. He looked at Declan. I keep everything. He gave them the email chain and the phone number. The email domain was a custom address Palliser Associates that Harker photographed and said he could trace the hosting records on. The phone number was a 215 area code, Philadelphia. Disconnected, as Ames had said, but numbers left footprints even after they went dark. They left Ames's brownstone at 2:15 with more than they'd arrived with and drove back to Harker's office in the kind of silence that happens between people who are processing things in parallel. Palliser Associates, Harker said, as he pulled into the parking space behind his building. Give me 2 hours on the domain hosting and the phone number. There'll be something. I'll work the board meeting angle, Declan said. Marielle needs to know what's coming before 9. I want to brief her before she walks into that room. Called her at 2:30 and expected voicemail. She picked up on the second ring. You're awake, he said. I haven't slept. Her voice was clear and precise, which told him she'd been doing exactly what he'd been doing working through it. Do you have? He told her. All of it in the ordered sequence of someone who has organized their thoughts for delivery. Clifton Ames connection, Palliser Associates, the corroborating thread between the Vantage Network and his own 6-year-old classified operation. The fact that Thorne's next move was most likely to appear at the board meeting in 6.5 hours. She listened without interrupting, which was, he'd come to understand, how she received serious information. Her questions when they came were precise. Raymond Falk, she said. You said he appeared in both your old operation and the current Vantage Network. Yes. Is he connected to Garrick directly? We haven't established a direct connection yet. The chain runs Thorne to Vantage to Falk. Whether they've had direct communication is something we're still building. What about the framing evidence? The evidence they're planning to use against you at the board meeting. Do you know what form it takes? The general shape of it. My vehicle entering the garage this morning. The unauthorized route change yesterday. My military background positioned as operational capability used for criminal purposes. And my connection to Harker's investigation, framed as evidence of a long-running scheme. Pause. That's thin. Thin depends on who's presenting it and to whom, he said. In a room full of board members who've just been told their COO of 11 years is the suspect, a credible alternative narrative has its own appeal. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a different quality, lower, more personal. When Tessa was in that car. Before you got to her. She stopped, started over. She told me she banged on the window. She said nobody came. Building security was stuck on floors that wouldn't open. Another pause. She said she could see the pillar. He didn't say anything. He understood she wasn't telling him this for a response. She was telling him because it had been sitting in her all evening and it needed to go somewhere. He said finally, I owe you something I don't have language for yet, she said. You don't owe me anything, he said. I made the choice. Doesn't cancel the debt. Her voice steadied again, moving back toward the executive register she was more comfortable in. What do you need from me for the board meeting? I need you to let me be in the room. A brief pause. The board won't... I know, I'm not asking to sit at the table. I'm asking to be present, somewhere in the room. When Thorne makes his move, I need to be able to respond in real time, not be called in after the fact. She thought about this. There's a side room, a breakout space adjacent to the boardroom. Glass partition, but the blinds can be drawn. You'd be able to hear everything through the audio system. If something happens that requires your direct involvement, I can invite you in. That works, he said. Declan. The use of his first name was deliberate. He understood. She'd used his last name for 8 months and hadn't switched to his first this entire day until right now. He's been at that building for 11 years. He knows how I think, how I move. A pause. He's going to have something I'm not expecting, Declan said. So will we. He ended the call and went back to work. 4:17 in the morning, Harker found the hosting record for the Palliser Associates, com domain. The registration had been managed through a privacy service, which was standard and expected. Payment record accessible because the privacy service had been hit with a data breach 2 years ago that had exposed a subset of its historical billing records And Harker had a copy of that exposure through a source he declined to specify, showed a credit card with the last four digits 77741 assigned to a corporate account. See, that corporate account, after 40 minutes of cross-referencing, appeared in one other place in Harker's files. It was the same account that had funded the operational expenses of the intelligence liaison team attached to Declan's classified operation 6 years ago. Raymond Falk's operational budget. Harker sat back and said nothing for a moment. It's the same people, Dec. I know. This isn't coincidence. They've been running this network for at least 6 years, probably longer. They placed you near Marielle Sterling intentionally. They used you as proximity intelligence. You were watching her routines every day, and someone was watching you do it. When they were ready to move on the acquisition, they had 8 months of operational intelligence, built from your own movements without you ever knowing you were providing it. Declan sat with this. The coffee in his mug had gone cold. Outside the street below Harker's window showed the first gray suggestion of early morning. Thorne's the inside man, he said. Falk's the network coordinator, and I was the unwitting surveillance platform. Until I noticed the Pathfinder, he agreed. He thought about the job posting that had appeared in his inbox 6 years ago. Staffing firm he'd never heard of. The interview that had gone smoothly and resulted in a position that paid well enough, asked little enough, and kept him close enough to the kind of ordered, controlled environment that a man reassembling himself after a catastrophic loss naturally gravitates toward. They had built a trap, and he had walked into it gratefully. He was not going to spend energy being angry about that right now. Anger was a resource, and he had limited time. But he noted it, filed it in the place where things that needed to be returned to were stored, and kept moving. Send everything to a secure location outside your network, he said to Harker. Everything we've built tonight. The Ames connection, the Palliser domain trace, the credit card link to Falk's operational account. All of it. Somewhere that can't be accessed or deleted if someone tries to reach into your systems. Harker was already moving. My guy at Axiom has an air-gapped server he uses for sensitive client materials. I'll upload everything there and have him generate a retrieval key. 2 copies, Declan said. Different locations. Already thinking it. Harker typed for a moment. What about you? What are you going to walk into that building with? Everything we have organized into something a board of directors can follow in under 10 minutes. He pulled his laptop toward him. I'm going to spend the next 2 hours writing the clearest summary of my life. Harker secured the files. The morning came in through the windows in pieces, the gray first, then the particular flat light of a New York November dawn, and finally the sound of the city resuming itself with the indifference of something that had been running continuously and barely registered the night. At 6:15, Declan drove back to Manhattan, went to his apartment, showered, changed, and checked on the wobbly kitchen table for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. Mrs. Farrow had left a note on his counter. Maya had slept on the cot and eaten breakfast, and had been walked to school on time. She'd drawn something on a piece of paper and left it on the table for him. He looked at it, a drawing in colored pencil of a man in a dark jacket standing next to a car. Proportions were approximate, as they tended to be with 7-year-olds, and the car had 5 wheels because she sometimes lost count. Underneath, in careful letters that were working hard to stay on an invisible line, Dad coming home. Det Pete City. He stood at the wobbly kitchen table and looked at the drawing for longer than he probably should have given the time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He arrived at Sterling Tower's east entrance at 7:40. The badge Brandon had promised was waiting at security, a temporary contractor pass that got him to the 39th floor, where Brandon met him and walked him to the boardroom level. She's been in her office since 6, Brandon said quietly. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept either, which meant Marielle's hours had become his hours, which was probably always true. Is Thorne here? Arrived at 7:30. Brandon's voice stayed professionally neutral. He stopped at her office to say good morning. She spoke to him for about 30 seconds through the doorway. Declan thought about that. Thought about what 30 seconds of that conversation cost her to perform. The breakout room, he said. Brandon opened a door adjacent to the main boardroom. The space was what Marielle had described: a narrow room with a glass partition facing the boardroom. The blinds currently closed, a small table, 2 chairs, and an audio panel that pulled the boardroom's internal speaker system. Declan set his laptop on the table, opened the files, and waited. The board meeting began at 9 on the minute. He could hear it through the shuffle of chairs, the sounds of a room filling. Marielle's voice, controlled and precise. Yes, he'd moving through the morning's formal agenda items with the efficiency of someone who had run 10,000 meetings and could do it in her sleep. The preliminary items took 22 minutes. Then, Marielle said, "Before we move to the restructuring agenda, I want to address the incident in the parking structure yesterday morning. Some of you have already been briefed by the security team. I'd like to give the full board a complete account." Declan leaned toward the speaker. She told it cleanly. The garage attack, Tessa's rescue, the investigation into the system access. She was precise about what was known and careful about what was still being determined. She did not mention Thorne by name. When she finished, a board member, a man named Ashworth, whose voice Declan recognized from occasional lobby conversations, said, "Marielle, I want to raise something related to this. Garrick, you mentioned this morning that you had information you wanted to share with the full board." Pause. Garrick Thorne's voice, and it was exactly as Declan had expected, measured, concerned. He's the specific tone of a man performing reluctance. "I do," Thorne said, "and I want to start by saying this is difficult for me to bring forward. I want you to know this comes from a place of genuine concern for the company and for your family." The room was quiet. "I've been provided with some information over the past 12 hours about the individual who intervened in the garage yesterday," Thorne said. Declan Rowe, the former driver. A deliberate pause. "There are aspects of his background and his behavior in the days leading up to yesterday's incident that I think the board needs to be aware of." Declan heard Marielle say, "Go ahead, Garrick." She said it in a completely neutral tone. Performance of a woman who had not spent the previous night preparing for exactly this. Thorne presented his case over 9 minutes. The unauthorized route change, the vehicle entering the garage, the military background framed, as Declan had predicted, as operational expertise that enabled the attack to be staged, and the rescue to be performed as a calculated maneuver to gain trust. Connection to Harker, presented as evidence of a network of former intelligence operatives working a scheme. It was well constructed. Declan gave him that. Someone had put genuine thought into the sequence of it, the way each piece reinforced the next. For a room of people who didn't know the underlying facts, it would have been persuasive. He watched through the gap at the edge of the blind. The board members' faces were visible in profile through the glass. Partition the particular expression of people who are receiving disturbing information about someone they've had no reason to distrust and no reason to trust. Marielle was at the head of the table. Her face was unreadable. When Thorne finished, she said, "Thank you, Garrick." A pause. "I'd like to bring someone in to respond to this. Given that these are serious allegations about an individual's conduct, I think the board should have the opportunity to hear from him directly." A murmur in the room. Thorne said, "Marielle, I don't think—" "The door on your left," Marielle said calmly. Declan stood up, closed his laptop, picked it up, opened the door into the boardroom. He walked to the near end of the table and set his laptop down. He looked at the board. 21 people, various degrees of alertness, all of them recalibrating in real time. He didn't look at Thorne first. He looked at Marielle. She gave him nothing, just a slight, precise nod that said, "You have the room." He looked at Thorne then. Thorne was at the far end of the table, dressed impeccably, looking at Declan with the controlled expression of someone who had not expected to see him here, and was managing the surprise with the skills of a man who'd been managing surprises for 11 years. "Mr. Thorne," Declan said. His voice was level. "I want to give you the opportunity to correct the record before I do," Declan said. "Then I'll go ahead." He opened his laptop, turned it to face the near end of the table, walked through it the way he'd planned in Harker's office, at 4 in the morning, clean, organized, wasted words. The credential access logs, the payment stream to Thorne's personal account, the Vantage Capital Network and its subsidiary chain, The attempted acquisition of the technology division. The garage operation as a coercion mechanism. He watched the board's faces as he moved through it. The expressions changed in sequenced doubt, recognition, something harder. He watched Thorne's face most carefully. Thorne held his composure for the first 6 minutes. He'd intervened. Then, somewhere around the moment Declan showed the payment stream terminating in his personal account, something shifted in the set of his jaw, a tightening, subtle and controlled, visible to someone who was specifically watching for it. Declan reached the last section. "I want to address the connection to my own background," he said. "Mr. Thorne is correct that I have a military history that was buried in classified files after an operation that went wrong. What he either doesn't know or has chosen not to mention is that the network responsible for what happened to Tessa Sterling yesterday appears to be connected to the same network that engineered that operational failure 6 years ago." He paused. "I have the corroborating documentation. My contacts files are secured off-site. Law enforcement has been notified and will receive the full package within the hour." That last part was a projection, a fact yet, but it became a fact 40 seconds later when his phone, set to silent in his jacket pocket, vibrated once with a text from Harker that said, "Package delivered. Federal contact confirmed. They're moving." He did not show the text to the room. He did not need to. What happened next? It took 38 minutes, which was both shorter and longer than it felt. Thorne spoke 3 sentences that were the beginning of a denial, clipped and precise. Then he stopped. He looked at Marielle. She was looking at him with the expression of a woman who has just spent 11 years revising her assessment of a person and has arrived at the correct answer. She said, "Garrick," just his name. He said, "You don't understand the full picture." "Give it to me," she said, "in this room. Right now." He didn't. What he did instead, and Declan saw it before it happened, the specific set of a man who has decided the performance is over, was push back his chair. Slowly, with the deliberate quality of someone choosing which kind of exit to make. "I want my attorney," he said. "Of course you do," Marielle said. Worth was already on his phone. 2 other board members were conferring in low voices. The room had the particular charged stillness of something that has been moving toward a specific moment and has now arrived at it. Declan closed his laptop. He thought about the drawing in his pocket, a man in a dark jacket next to a car with 5 wheels. He thought about 8 months of early mornings and 6:30 pickups, and a woman who had said good morning to the back of his head and never once asked his name between the stops. He thought about Tessa in the garage. "Who are you?" "The man your mother fired." "Yes, TB." He thought about his old teammate, and a mission that went wrong in a specific direction that had designed it to go wrong in, and 6 years of a quiet life that turned out not to have been as separate from any of this as he'd believed. Garrick Thorne sat at the far end of the table and said nothing further. Outside the 43rd floor windows, Manhattan moved in all directions, indifferent and continuous, the way it always did, regardless of what happened in the rooms above it. It wasn't over. Declan knew that. There were federal investigators and legal proceedings, and the specific long machinery of evidence being examined and charges being built. There was Raymond Falk, somewhere in a network that was going to take months to fully dismantle. No, there was his own service record and the classified operation, and the question of what accountability looked like 6 years after the fact. Of that was resolved yet. But in the boardroom of Sterling Tower, on a gray November morning, Garrick Thorne had asked for his attorney, and that was the sound of 11 years of careful construction beginning to come apart at the seams. Declan picked up his laptop. He had a daughter to call before the school day ended. Garrick Thorne left the boardroom with the particular stillness of a man who has decided that composure is the last thing he owns, and he intends to keep it until a lawyer tells him otherwise. He walked to the elevator without looking at anyone, pressed the button, waited with his hands at his sides, and rode down. Yes, he'd intervened. Declan watched him go through the glass wall of the boardroom and thought about all the mornings he'd spent in a building. This man had been quietly taken apart from the inside, and felt something that wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like a specific exhaustion of attention that has been held on for a very long time and has just finally been allowed to release. The boardroom was controlled chaos for the next 40 minutes. Ashworth was on the phone. 2 other board members had moved to a corner and were talking in the rapid, clipped way of people who need to align on a position before the next thing happens. Marielle's general counsel, a compact woman named Hirsch, who had arrived on the 39th floor at some point during the presentation and whom Declan hadn't noticed until she was suddenly very present, was standing at Marielle's shoulder, speaking in a low, continuous stream that Marielle was absorbing with the expression of someone drinking from a fire hose and managing it. Declan sat in a chair against the wall and did not insert himself into any of it. His job in the room was done. The rest was the machinery of institutions, doing what institutions do when a crisis arrives with documentation. His phone buzzed. Harker Federal Contact confirmed receipt. They're fielding 2 agents. Expect movement on Thorne by end of day. Also Falk. He's in the system now. They knew the name. Declan typed back, how? Harker, he's been on a watch list for 2 years. Our file gave them the connection they were missing. Deck your operation. They're reopening the review. He read that twice, set the phone down on his knee, looked at the window. The sky over Manhattan was the same flat November gray it had been all morning, unchanged by any of the things that had happened under it. He thought about that sometimes, the way the physical world just continued, indifferent to whatever was happening at human salt scale. It had always struck him as either comforting or terrible, depending on the day. Today it was comforting. Marielle found him at the wall 40 minutes later, after the room had cleared to its working remnant of lawyers and board officers and the specific people whose jobs existed for exactly this kind of moment. She pulled a chair and sat beside him, which surprised him slightly. She was not someone he'd seen choose a wall chair over a head-of-table position. She looked tired, not in the dramatic way of someone collapsing, just the honest, visible tiredness of a person who has been managing an impossible situation on no sleep and has now reached the point where the body begins sending invoices for what the mind has been spending. He's being picked up, she said. Hirsch coordinated with the federal agents. Meet him downstairs. She paused. He walked out of this building thinking he could make it to his attorney's office and start constructing a response before anyone moved on him. He underestimated the timeline, Declan said. He underestimated a lot of things. She was quiet for a moment. Called me, last night, around 11. I didn't answer, I was on the phone with you. He left a voicemail. Said he'd heard I was under a lot of stress, and he wanted me to know he was there for whatever the company needed. She stopped. I listened to it at 1 in the morning. 11 years of his voice on my voicemail. Hundreds of them. And I was sitting there knowing what he'd done, listening to him perform concern. Declan didn't say anything. The thing that's hardest, she said, and her voice was careful, in the way of someone navigating terrain they haven't walked before, is not the betrayal itself. The revision. Every memory of 11 years of working beside him, every decision I trusted him on, every meeting where I listened to his counsel, all of it has to be re-examined. I have to go back through 11 years of my own professional life and figure out which parts of it were real and which parts were being managed. All of it was being managed, Declan said. People who run long cons still have real moments. Performance and the person aren't completely separate. They can't be. He probably told you some things that were genuinely true and advised you correctly on things that weren't useful to him to distort. He paused. It doesn't make it better, but it means you're not starting from zero. Your instincts were right about most things. One person compromised the record. She looked at him. When did you become the one talking me through things? I'm not sure that's what this is. It is, she said. Critically, just accurately. He looked at his hands. The cut on his arm had been properly bandaged that morning. He'd found the first aid kit under his bathroom's sink, where it had lived untouched for 8 months and had done a reasonable job. His knee still ached when he straightened it fully. He was 32 years old and feeling the specific way a body feels when it has been asked to do several things in rapid succession that it is technically capable of but would have preferred advance notice for. What happens now, he said. For the company. Hirsch thinks the acquisition attempt will collapse once the Vantage network is exposed. The entities that were pressuring the board through back channels, most of that pressure came from manufactured that Garrick was helping create. Once the source is visible, the leverage disappears. She folded her hands in her lap. Technology division stays intact. The company survives. And the security structure. Rebuilt from the ground up, she said. Everything Garrick had access to, every system he touched, every protocol he helped design, audited, and overhauled. Axiom Shield is out. We're going independent, internally staffed, with no contractor access to core infrastructure. She paused. I was thinking about who should lead that effort. He looked at her. I know what you're going to say, she said. I don't think you do. You're going to say you don't work for people who don't trust you. He was quiet for a moment. I was going to say that I'm not a security systems architect. I'm a former SEAL who spent 8 months driving your car. The gaps between those things are significant. The gaps, she said, are exactly what I'm interested in. Security architecture I can hire. Systems design I can hire. What I cannot hire is someone who noticed a charcoal pathfinder in Manhattan traffic on day 1 of a surveillance operation, ran the plate, identified a shell company, changed a pickup route, and then turned his car around on the day I fired him. She met his eyes. That's not a skill set. That's a way of seeing. And I've been building things for 20 years, and I know the difference. He looked at the window, the flat gray light. There are conditions, he said. I choose my team. The people I work with, I select them. Legacy hires, no political placements. My team. Agreed. Operational decisions within the security division are mine. I don't run approvals through committees for anything time-sensitive. Define scope, she said. I'll need reporting. Weekly. In writing. Not because I don't trust you, because that's how I run things. That's reasonable. What else? He looked at her. Every day at 3 o'clock I leave. Board meeting, billion-dollar emergency. Building on fire. I leave at 3 to pick up my daughter. That's not negotiable, and it's not a conversation. She didn't hesitate. Done. He hadn't expected that one to be easy. The speed of it made him recalibrate slightly. You didn't even... I have a daughter too, she said. I've spent 18 years making her secondary to board meetings and quarterly reviews. And yesterday she was in a car headed into a concrete wall because someone knew her routine better than I did. No, she looked at him steadily. 3 o'clock. I'll put it in the contract. He sat with that for a moment. I'm not a company man, he said. It was important to him that she understood this. I don't do loyalty to an institution. I do loyalty to people. And it takes time. And I'm not going to pretend the last 24 hours changes the fundamental reality that we don't actually know each other. She said, We don't. She was quiet for a second. But I know you noticed a tail on day 3 that my entire professional security apparatus missed. You changed a route because something felt wrong, and you were right. You turned your car around when you had every reason to keep driving. She paused. I know that when my daughter asked you who you were, you didn't tell her you were a hero. You told her you were the man I fired. A very slight shift in her expression. That's the right answer. Most people would have said something else. People would have kept driving, he said. Yes, she said. They would have. There was a silence between them that had a different quality than the silences he was used to with her, less the silence of hierarchy, of employer and employee, and the wall of invisibility that existed between them. Yes, more the silence of two people who have been through something together and are sitting with the weight of it, and not trying to make it smaller than it is. Work for me, she said. Her voice was slightly different, quieter, more deliberate. Work with me. There's a difference. I'm only recently learning it myself. He looked at her. I'll think about it, he said. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. I'll take it. She said, and stood up to you and moved back toward the center of the room, where her lawyers and her counsel and the machinery of Aftermath were waiting for her. He sat against the wall a little longer, and then he called Maya's school. The school secretary put him through to the main office, and the main office sent someone to get Maya out of class. And when she came on the line, she said, Dad, the specific tone she used when something had happened, and she was trying to figure out what category to put it in. I'm okay, he said. Everything's okay. I'll explain tonight. Kowalski said, You called the school. I wanted to hear your voice. Pause. That's weird, Dad. You're right, he said. It is. Have a good afternoon. I'll be there at 3. He could hear the smile in her voice, even though she was clearly trying to keep it out. Okay, she said. And then quickly, before she hung up, I left you a drawing, he said. I have it with me. She hung up first. He sat for another minute. The noise of the boardroom operated around him at a remove. He thought about all the ways a life could be shaped. You never see clearly until you look back from a distance and enough distance the job posting that arrived when he needed it most. The 8 months of silence in a car with a woman who never asked his name, the pathfinder that he'd noticed because he'd spent 12 years being trained to notice exactly that kind of thing. And then kept noticing after the training stopped because some habits don't have an off switch. He thought about his teammate, Marcus Webb, who had died in a location that Raymond Falk had designed him to die in, and whose death had been filed under classified failure for 6 years, while the network that caused it moved on to other operations. Marcus had been 31. He'd had a sister in Atlanta. And a dog from Briggs and an opinion about barbecue that he was willing to defend at length with the intensity most people reserved for religion. Declan thought about the federal investigators who were, according to Harker's text, now in possession of the file that connected the Vantage network to Marcus's death. What accountability looked like 6 years after the fact. He suspected it would be incomplete and slow and deeply unsatisfying in the way that institutional accountability tends to be. But it would be something. And something, for now, was what he had. Tessa came to find him that afternoon. He was in the temporary office Brandon had set up for him on the 39th floor, working through the initial framework for what a rebuilt security structure would require, when she appeared in the doorway wearing paint-stained jeans and a canvas jacket, and the expression of someone who has something specific to say and has been thinking about how to say it. "Can I come in?" she said. "It's not really my office," he said. "Close enough." She came in and sat in the chair across from the desk, not the way a teenager sits in a chair, sprawled and provisional, but upright, bows on knees, looking directly at him. She'd gotten her composure back. He could see that the thing that had happened to her was still sitting close to the surface. There was something in the set of her shoulders that wasn't entirely settled, but she was managing it the way she managed things, which was by facing forward and dealing. "I remembered something," she said. "Yesterday morning, before the garage. I was in the lobby waiting for the elevator, and I heard 2 men talking near the security desk. I wasn't really listening, but one of them said something about a transition timeline, that the schedule had moved up." She looked at him. "I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I've been thinking about it all day, and I think one of the voices was Garrick Thorne's." Declan was very still. "Did you hear the other person?" "I just heard Thorne, and the words transition timeline, schedule moved up. I almost walked over because I thought he might be talking about my mother's expansion project, and I wanted to know." She paused. "I didn't walk over because I was late to the garage." He looked at her for a moment. "You need to tell the investigators this. The federal agents who took Thorne into custody, they'll want to interview you. This corroborates the accelerated timeline. It places him in the building with knowledge of the operational schedule." She said, "That's why I'm telling you. First. Because I wanted to know if it actually matters." "It matters," he said. She nodded, let out a breath. "Okay." She looked at her hands, then looked back up. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, why did you keep the job for 8 months? My mother, she's not easy to work for. I know that. She treats people like resources. She doesn't mean to, I think, but she does." She paused. "Most drivers quit within 3 months. You stayed 8. He thought about how to answer that honestly. "The job was predictable," he said. "I needed predictable at the time. I had a 7-month-old daughter and a career that had just ended badly, and I needed something I could rely on to be the same every day." He paused. "And your mother is actually quite good at her job. It's interesting to be around someone who's very good at what they do, even if the relationship is what it was." "Invisible," Tessa said. "I didn't mind being invisible," he said. For a while it was actually a relief. She looked at him with the perceptive quality he'd noticed in her the very first time he'd driven her, the way she processed what people said and what they didn't say simultaneously. "Not anymore," she said. "No," he said. "Not anymore." She stood up, started toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. "She's going to mess this up, she said. "Whatever she's offering you, she's going to forget at some point that you're a person instead of a function, and you're going to have to remind her." She paused. "Telling you this so you know to expect it, not so you say no." He looked at her. "You sound like someone who's had some experience with that." 18 years of experience," she said. "She's getting better at it." Since yesterday. Actually, she's getting better at it. Very fast. A slight thing in her expression that wasn't quite smileless, but was related to one. She called me this morning to ask how I was doing. Tell me the schedule, not to coordinate. Just to ask how I was doing. She looked at the doorframe. He said, "It's not." She left. He sat with what she'd said for a while. Then he picked up his phone and called Harker. "Update," Harker said, picking up before it finished the first ring. "Tessa has a witness statement. She overheard Thorne discussing the accelerated timeline the morning of the attack. I'm connecting her to the federal team." "That's good. That's very good." A pause. "Deck the review board on your operation. I heard from my contact an hour ago. The DOD is opening a formal inquiry. Raymond Falk is in federal custody, as of 45 minutes ago picked up in Philadelphia. The watch list flag went active when we delivered the file." Harker's voice carried something that wasn't quite excitement, more like the careful quality of someone delivering information they've been waiting a long time to deliver. "They're going to re-examine the operational record. Classified status is going to be lifted as part of the inquiry process. Going to take months, probably longer. But it's happening." Declan stood at the window of the 39th floor temporary office. The gray November sky had, at some point in the afternoon, shifted toward something lighter, not cleared exactly, but thinned, the way clouds sometimes thinned in late afternoon to let a kind of diffuse, even light through. "Marcus's family," he said. "His sister. She needs to know before the press gets it. I've already reached out to the attorney who was handling her inquiries. She'll be notified through proper channels before any public statement." He stood for a moment. He was not going to fall apart about this now. He'd fallen apart about Marcus in a parking lot in Virginia 6 years ago, alone. The specific, ugly way that grief arrives when it's been held back long enough. And he'd put himself back together piece by piece in the months that followed. And he was not going to undo that work by standing in a borrowed office on the 39th floor of a building in Midtown. He was going to let himself feel it for a moment. He did. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and looked at his watch. 2:57. He picked up his jacket and his laptop, stopped at Brandon's desk to leave a note about connecting Tessa with the federal investigators, and took the elevator down. He walked out through the east entrance into the November afternoon, and the city moved around him in every direction, indifferent and continuous and enormous. He picked Maya up at 3:04, which was 4 minutes late, because there'd been a backup at the light on Sepson 7th, and she was standing on the sidewalk in front of the school with her backpack on and a look on her face, that said she'd already done the mental calculation of how late he was and had decided it was within acceptable range. "You're late," she said. 4 minutes. Still late. Took her backpack from her shoulder and put it on his own. She let him, which was something she was starting to resist on principle, because she was 7, and independent, but which she still permitted on days when something had shifted between them, and she wanted the gesture without wanting to explain why. "Dad," she said as they walked. "Yeah." Mrs. Kowalski said that sometimes things happen, and that's how people find out what they're made of. He looked down at her. "When did Mrs. Kowalski say that?" "To the class. Today. About the science project that broke." She paused. "But I think it applies more to what happened with you." He was quiet for a half a block. "What do you think happened with me?" "Something at work," she said, with the authority of someone who has assembled information from limited sources and is confident in the conclusion. "Mrs. Farrow said you were very brave. She said you helped someone. Mrs. Farrow knows more than I told her." "Mrs. Farrow watches the news," Maya said simply. He thought about that, the news. Of course. A garage attack at a major Manhattan corporation, a rescue, a former driver. It would have run somewhere, yet. It would have been brief, the kind of item that runs in the afternoon cycle and gets pushed down by evening, but it would have run. "Does that bother you?" he asked. "That people know?" She thought about it, with the seriousness she gave things she actually considered important. He said, "I think people should know." She reached up and took his hand, which was something she did less often now because 7 was, apparently, old enough to have opinions about public hand-holding. But she did it now, without ceremony. "Are you going to have a different job now?" "I think so." "Driving or not driving?" "Not driving." "Something else." "Like what?" "Like making sure bad things don't happen to people who can't see them coming. She considered this with the particular gravity of someone evaluating a job description. Sounds hard, she said. It is, he said. But you're good at it. He looked down at her. What makes you say that? Because you noticed, she said. You always notice things. You noticed when I rearranged my room, even though I only moved one shelf. You noticed when Gerald was facing the wrong way. You noticed she stopped, searching for the word. You pay attention to things that other people don't think matter. And I think that's probably... She stopped again. I think that's the thing. He squeezed her hand. I think you're right, he said. They walked the rest of the way, home in the ordinary way of a father and daughter at the end of an afternoon, moving through a city that didn't know them and didn't need to. Past the bodega, where Felix was restacking shelves in the window, and the parking garage and the building on the corner, with the scaffolding that had been up for 2 years without anyone doing anything visible on it. The apartment was the same. The refrigerator hummed. The floorboard near the bathroom door creaked under his left foot, and he stepped over it automatically, put his keys on the hook, set the laptop bag by the desk, and went to the kitchen to start dinner. Maya appeared in the doorway 7 minutes later with her homework. She sat at the wobbly kitchen table, put her pencil between her teeth, and started working. Yet she'd brought a fresh sheet of paper for drawing alongside the math worksheet, which was her usual hedge against any boredom in case the homework finished and the evening required reinforcement. He made pasta, added garlic and canned tomatoes, and a bay leaf he'd bought 3 months ago and mostly forgotten about. Kitchen smelled like something warm and ordinary. He thought about what Tessa had said. She's going to mess this up. She's getting better at it. It's not nothing. He thought about Marielle at that board table, performing neutrality, while Thorne constructed his case, holding it together for the 22 minutes required, because someone had told her so the situation demanded it, and she decided to trust that assessment, even after the morning she'd had. He thought about the word Harker had written on his whiteboard. Why? And he understood now, fully, what the answer was. It wasn't the acquisition. It wasn't the money, or not only the money. The network behind all of this had been operating for years, and what it was really doing, what people like Raymond Falk actually built and sold, was the systematic exploitation of the places where human beings failed to see each other. Marielle had failed to see him. He had failed to see the scaffolding being built around his own movements. The board had failed to see Thorne. Yes, that to see, and everyone had been looking at the thing in front of them and missing the thing one layer beneath it, was the actual product. Invisibility manufactured and weaponized. He'd spent 6 years being invisible by choice, using it as a kind of protection. If no one could see him clearly, nothing could find him. It had seemed like safety. What it had actually been was a long, slow concession, a way of making himself smaller than the life he was capable of living, on the theory that smaller things were harder to hit. The theory had been wrong. They'd found him anyway. The only difference was that when they found him, he still had enough of himself intact to turn the car around. Plated the pasta, called Maya for dinner. She came with her homework half finished, and sat down and pulled the plate toward her with the unceremonious appetite of a 7-year-old at the end of a school day. It smells good, she said. Try it before you say that. She tried it. It is good. She picked up her fork with the decisive air of someone delivering a verdict. Better than last week. Last week I forgot the garlic. Was a bad week for pasta, she said seriously. He sat across from her at the wobbly table, the table he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. That rocked slightly when you leaned on it, bore the evidence of dozens of dinners and homework sessions and drawings that had been taped to it, and removed and taped again, and he ate dinner with his daughter, and the refrigerator hummed, and outside the city moved in its continuous indifferent way. The next day he accepted Marielle's offer. Not because the conditions were perfect, they weren't. Because he trusted her completely, he didn't yet. And trust was something he built slowly, and by evidence, not by decision. He accepted because the work was real, and he was good at it, and spending the rest of his life making himself invisible in the service of protecting. A life he wasn't fully living seemed, finally, like the wrong kind of cost. Called Marielle at 7 in the morning, before she'd had time to be in a meeting. She picked up on the second ring. You've decided, she said. Question. Yes. The conditions stand. They were already written into the contract last night, she said. Brandon drafted it while you were still in the building. He was quiet for a beat. You were that sure, she said. I was that prepared. A pause. There's a difference. I'm aware, he said. He heard something that might have been a small laugh, quickly contained. Monday morning, she said. East entrance. 7:30. Make it 7, he said. I want to see the building before the day starts. 7, she agreed. He ended the call and stood in his kitchen in the early morning quiet, coffee in hand, and looked out the window at the street below where Felix was opening the bodega gate on the corner, and a woman was walking a dog that clearly wanted to go home, and a delivery truck was double parked, with its hazards blinking. The ordinary machinery of a morning. He thought about all the mornings he'd stood exactly here and watched exactly this, and understood for the first time that this view, this specific unremarkable window onto a street that didn't know him, was not evidence of a small life. It was the ground, the place he left from and came back to, the thing that made the work possible, not the thing the work had displaced. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with Gerald under her arm and her hair completely unsalvageable from sleep. You're up early, she said. I'm always up early. Your thinking face again? A different kind this time, he said. She came and stood beside him and looked out the window at Felix and the woman with the dog and the delivery truck. She didn't ask what she was looking at because she didn't need to. She just stood there, leaning slightly against his arm, watching the street with the same undemanding attention she gave everything she found interesting. After a while she said, Is it better? The new job? He looked down at her. Yeah, he said. I think it is. She nodded, satisfied. Good, she said, and then I'm hungry. He said, Go get dressed, and I'll make eggs. She went. He heard the floorboard creak where she stepped on it, right foot. She never went around it the way he did, and the sound of the bathroom door and the water running, and the small, ordinary sounds of a morning assembling itself. Put his coffee mug down and got the eggs out. Quiet chauffeur that Marielle Sterling had fired, the man who had spent 8 months being invisible in the service of someone who never asked his name, who had built a careful small life and tended it like something fragile, didn't come back. The man who walked through those doors on Monday morning at 7 o'clock, who shook hands with Brandon and rode the elevator to the 39th floor and stood at the window of the office that was now actually his, with his name on the directory listing that Brandon had already updated. That man was not smaller than the situation he was in. For the first time in 6 years, he was exactly the right size for it. And every day at 3 o'clock, without exception, he left.